My name is Cramer. I currently reside in Mobile, Alabama. I'm the program coordinator with the Mobile Arts Council. Currently, we're an arts nonprofit whose main mission is to create a vibrant cultural community and advocate for the arts within our city and the surrounding area, Mobile and Baldwin County. We are affectionately known as the arts cheerleaders of the area. And so I personally love that moniker. I like to think of myself as such. I've been performing for a pretty long time. I got my start as a dancer when I was just a toddler. I started dance when I was 2, I believe. So, once I could walk pretty steadily, my mom put me in a dance class, and I danced from the age of 2 to, I'd say, the age of 10 probably. And then I actually transitioned for a little bit. There was some overlap. I actually rode horses competitively for 10 years while doing some dance still. And then I moved on to horseback riding full time I say full time, I was a student, of course, but that was from about 5th grade to about 8th grade. And then my best friend in the entire world, her name is Sarah Claire, she did a little cabaret at our school. And she invited me to come watch it, and she just had so much fun. And so the next year, when I was in 8th grade, I did that cabaret, and I never really looked back. I loved to talk, and I got to, be on stage and dance, which is something I'd loved. But then I also got to sing and speak and just do it in front of an audience, which is something I had never really experienced as an older teenager. And I just really got into acting from there. And I didn't find the costuming until I was actually an upperclassman in college. I went to the University of South Alabama, which is also in Mobile. And the really cool thing about that school is I did major in performance. I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts in performance, but you don't just do one thing while you're at South. You get a very comprehensive education. So the first 2 years I was at South, I worked in the Scenic shop, which is where I did a bunch of scenic painting and construction. And then my junior year, I was told I needed to at least try the costume shop. We had just gotten a new costuming professor. She was looking for some hardworking students, to kind of make her first year a little bit easier of a transition. And I said, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And then I just fell in love with it. I love costume construction. I love making clothes for people that fit them just right. It's so cool to see a young woman or a young man or anybody else put on a costume and see the look on their face, feeling a piece of clothing that, was made for them. It's such a fun feeling because, in America, sometimes shopping, I'm sure anywhere, but my experience in America, shopping for clothes, if you aren't a size 2 or a size 0, can sometimes be extremely disheartening. So having a piece of clothing that fits you just right and was made for your body and feeling so comfortable and confident in that is a really powerful moment for anybody. And I love it when I'm able to construct something that does that for that person. My grandmother she's a huge arts advocate herself. She got me into my first ever role that wasn't just dancing. A cousin of ours actually wrote a play. It's called Conecuh People. Conecuh is a river that runs through Alabama. It's also a county where a lot of my family hails from. And his name was Wade Hall. He has since passed away, but he wrote a play called Conecuh People that was about his childhood and him growing up in this area of Alabama. And my first ever role was unnamed girl. I was just a little girl that got to run all over the stage. And this play is set in 1940s, 1930s Alabama, I believe. Super country, super run-of-the-mill farm life type of story. But my grandma said, well, you love dancing, you like to be in front of people, so maybe you'd like to do something where you have a line or two and you get to be part of a show that isn't just centered on dance and tells, an overall story with a beginning point and a climax and a resolution. And she was right. I did love it. I was pretty hard on myself. I always tell people this story. The show actually jaded me a little bit because I was super hard on myself about my grades, and because I kind of traveled 45 minutes away from my home to this theater where it happened. It's called the Red Door Theater. It's in Union Springs, Alabama, which is near Conecuh County. I got a B in math for the first time. I think I made an 89 instead of a 90, which would have been the A benchmark. And I was so mad because I was just so tired. I made a C on a test or something, which made me get the B in the class. So that was the first and last play I did for 4 years before I found that cabaret experience that I mentioned earlier. But I did love it. I just was a little dramatic fourth grader at the time and really wanted to make an A in math, and I didn't. I was very fortunate. I came to the University of South Alabama right after they formed their first improv troupe. I don't even remember the first name of it. It is now called Improv USA. It was called a different name when I started, and that was a group that I wasn't a part of, but I auditioned for the improv troupe at the end of my freshman year, and I got in. And I quickly learned the difference. You know, when we do plays or musicals that have a script, they're extremely rehearsed. Everyone learns their lines, everyone learns their movements, and you have the story to tell. And with improv, it's almost the opposite. You're creating the story in live time. You hope it's funny. Improv is, you know, generally only entertaining if it's funny. So you're having to be witty and keep a clear head so you can keep the story going, even though you have no idea how it's going to end until it does. So the difference, I would say, is improv, whereas you have plays and musicals that are very rehearsed, improv is very practiced. I liken it more to a sports game. You know, you never know when the goals are going to happen in a soccer game, but you know they have to happen in order to win. You never know when the jokes or the really authentic moments in improv are going to happen, but you know they have to. Whereas in a scripted show, you get to rehearse and get to plan out all these things and put in a bunch of acting technique that you've learned in your classes or dance technique if you're in a musical. And improv is just spur of the moment. Do your best. Hopefully you get a laugh, and you just got to stay in the moment and stay focused and stay sharp.
Have you had any models in terms of improvisation?
I do watch a lot of Saturday Night Live. I find that the person whose sense of humor I try and model is Adie Bryant. I think she is so funny, and I think she is so talented. And she, you know, has recently transitioned into being a writer for her own show on Hulu, and you can just really hear her humor come through there as well. And I just think she is so authentically funny. She's funny without trying, and she always has these beautiful bits to add to these scenes where you almost have to believe they're scripted because they're so good. And her wit is something that I try and model throughout my daily life even. I love to make people laugh, and I think she's just some of the best, as good as they come. I'm also a huge fan of Robin Williams style comedy. I watch his bits on Whose Line Is It Anyway all the time. I've seen them all hundreds of times, so I know them like the back of my hand, but I laugh just as hard as I did the first time because he is also just so authentic and so naturally talented at it. And those are two people that I really respect in that industry. I have been told I should. I'm a little scared to. I'm not afraid to admit I'm funny. I do think I am funny, but my humor is pretty much solely in the moment, witty. I've never had an opportunity to write out a joke that was, you know, planned and tested out on an audience, but it is something I'm very interested in doing. I just did a show with a friend of mine who's actually really been pushing me to go to some of these open mics. So it's something I think I'm about to try and get into. I'm actually very excited. We have something down here in Mobile called the Nappy Awards. They stem from a newspaper here called Lanyap. And these awards encompass just all of Mobile culture. They have different genres, you know, there's city life, nightlife, arts and culture, business, and one of the categories is, like I said, arts and culture, and one of the subcategories under that is best local comedian. And I was actually nominated for that sort of as a joke, but then based on the people who knew me and knew how I love to make people laugh, it got a lot of traction. So I think I'm currently still in the running for that award. I won't know for a little bit. And again, I'm not a comedian by trade, so I think it's a weird position to be put in to be nominated for it, but it was really cool for it to get some traction and for when people saw it to text me or call me and say, you know what, you really are funny. It fits.
Have you had a part or a role that you grew more attached?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Long answer, in the moment, this was in the fall of 2019, so right before the pandemic hit. My university, the University of South Alabama, did a production of George Bernard Shaw's Major Barbara. George Bernard Shaw is most famously known for writing Pygmalion. He wrote this extremely funny character who it's a 3-act play. She's only in act 2, and she is truly just comedic relief for this kind of long and preachy play, which is what George Bernard Shaw is known for, to be fair. But her name's Rummy. She's a drunk, homeless know-it-all, and I was cast as that role. And as far as the initial reaction to that casting, I was a little concerned because I had just come off of a year of having some pretty good roles. And as far as line amount goes and time on stage, Rummy would not be considered a good role. I think I had the 3-hour play and I was on stage for 5 or 10 minutes maybe, and only in act 2. But she is a character that I got to experiment a lot with because my director, who I love, my mentor, his name is John Nara. I owe so much to that man. He spent a lot of time with myself and my scene partner, and we really got to hone in on some intricacies of the scene. So it wasn't just slapstick comedy. It was, these people are homeless and in pain, and we get to navigate that level. And why are they making these jokes? To stay alive is why they're trying to make themselves be happy, because they have nothing else to live for if not laughter. And I have since grown even closer to that role, not just because of the work I did on it then, but because of the pandemic. I was very much robbed of a senior year. I was cast as Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream. I'm more of a mid-sized, curvier girl, so to be cast as a fairy was a huge bit of validation for me, and it was going to be a great role to have as an upperclassman. But that show got canceled due to COVID, and then my entire senior year we didn't have any live performances due to the pandemic. So Rummy is the last role that I got to play on the stage as a student, and she has become very important to me because of that as well. But at the time, just finding the humor in all the pain, which would grow to be such a huge lesson in the next 2 years. In November of 2019, we had no idea what was coming in the next 4 months. And then 2 years have passed and we've lost so many people and we've gone through so much, this huge collective trauma. And I still have people that come up to me, and I would do this bit backstage to get into character where I would just go, Rummy, and people come up and do that to me still. And it's very nice and it's very funny. And I love her. She's probably my favorite role I've ever played. It's very interesting. I've actually talked a lot about this with some of my former professors. I know that I am only a year older than some of the oldest people that are in college right now, which is a majority of the people I've gotten the chance to work with. But I grew up in an age where so much navigation was happening with things like social media and film. They weren't super defined, in my opinion, yet. I use Instagram as a good example. I got Instagram the year it came out. So I'm a part of the generation that kind of defined what Instagram is doing now, whereas everyone younger than me has largely had their lives defined by influencer culture and Instagram and Facebook, and that translates onto the screen. But I think that's why I prefer theater. It's it's so real and you have to work incredibly hard. Not that people in the film industry or the influencer industry don't work hard. They do in their own rights, but it's so intimate. It's so personal. You don't get to do a retake. And this most recent project that I've worked on with the University of South Alabama, where I assistant directed their most recent production, watching these children navigate something that they haven't gotten the chance to do in a few years that has nothing to do with a screen, that's just true realism, and these young adults who are having to act like teenagers and having to portray that to an audience. It's been really powerful, but it's very interesting. And I think the acting profession, in terms of realism and honesty and authenticity, has become a bit more of a challenge because we're so used to being able to hide behind a screen. And so many of our huge blockbuster films are so heavily CGI'd, and you don't see these honest reactions. You just see the very talented actor Tom Holland, I'll use as an example. Some of his best moments in Spider-Man, he has a mask on. So you don't get to see these authentic facial expressions, even though his vocal work is amazing. And I think it's very interesting for people my age and younger to have to navigate that, because there is a lack of authenticity in our industry right now, especially via film and social media. It's interesting. I did take vocal classes. I was in singing instruction with multiple professors while I was at South. I also had a vocal coach when I was in middle and high school back in Montgomery. And I think it's very useful. There are definitely crossover techniques with breath control. And if you have to say that huge to be or not to be speech from Hamlet, you can definitely employ some of the breathing techniques you would use in a singing class to make sure you breathe at the right moments and have more breath control. I will say accessibility to such things is not always capability of certain people. Voice lessons are very expensive no matter where you go. And I do not think it's a necessity. I think it is beneficial, but you definitely don't need it if you can find time to put in your own work. I love all of my voice teachers, but accessibility is a huge issue to something like that. So I actually do not believe it to be necessary. You know, if you can get up on stage and do a body roll or do something your body doesn't normally do in an everyday setting, then I do believe it makes it all the more easier to go up on stage and mimic being human. I know that's kind of weird, but essentially that's what we're taught in our technique classes. We have to go up on stage and act like we do every day. which is very hard because you want to perform it. And if you look like you're performing it, then it's not going to be believable. So if you can go and push your body to its limits, then you are definitely able to dial it back. And dance 100% helped me with that. One of my all-time favorites, someone who I watched her in a movie when I was little, and it was kind of a, hey, I want to do that. Meryl Streep, she is unbelievably gifted. I can't put into words how talented I think she is. Her ability on the screen to just, like I said, mimic being a human being, and then her stage work as well. I've watched many a bootleg performance of hers when she did work on Broadway or Shakespeare in the Park, or any of her stage work, because she went to Yale for theater, and there's some videos of some of her stuff there. She is just unparalleled in her abilities, and I really look up to her as an actress. Keira Knightley is my favorite film in the entire world is the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, and it's largely in part to her acting ability. She brought such a naturalism to her portrayal of Elizabeth Bennet, and it's something that I would quite literally sell my soul to be able to do. She's just so natural on the screen and so earnest in her line deliveries and her facial expressions. I really adore her performance, and I've adored her in every other thing she's been in. I do largely look up to women, because those are roles that I would consider myself up for, and I love to watch all of them just do their thing. But Michael Caine is also an actor that I greatly admire. He's someone we studied we did an acting for the camera class while I was at South. And he is, much to my professor's credit, someone I do believe is worth studying. He's also very natural. His deliveries are always spot on. His ability to analyze a script is also largely unparalleled, and that's such a huge part of what we do. It's not just line memorization, it's what emotion do I need to put behind this word here, why am I saying this? And he brings about such a natural ability to showcase that, and I think it's just amazing.
Are you writing on the side, or are you dabbling with that a little bit?
I am actually. I recently helped one of my friends who is currently a senior at the University of South Alabama. She's very into improv and stand-up, and she's very, very funny. And she wrote a scripted show where she created 3 characters that were all based in comedy. And she presented me with a script and said, okay, I've written it, help me refine it. And we sat down, and I kid you not, we worked for 8 hours straight, just plucking out different things, revising everything, making the jokes, go from being kind of broadly funny to here's why this is funny. And it ended up being a hit. I went to the second performance of it. It was 2 nights only, and people were just howling with laughter, I was so proud of her, but I was also so proud of me because I was able to hear some jokes, get some laughs that I had written. I'm also currently working on, and it's one of those things that I have been working on forever. I just kind of return to it when I have time. My favorite piece of literature in the world is a medieval morality play called Everyman. And while I am not personally extremely religious, this play is about the life and death of human beings. The titular character, Everyman, that is what he's called. He's not given a name. And the very beginning of the play, you have God send death down to help every man navigate the ending of his life, where he says goodbye to things like material possession, familial relationships, all the things you don't get to take with you wherever we go next. And I'm working on my own adaptation of that. I just love it so much, and I want to put my own spin on it. I started working on it at the beginning of the pandemic, so it has been a slow amount of progress, but progress nonetheless. I'm hoping it can come to fruition one day because I love that piece of literature. It's amazing. And like I said, it is based in Christianity just because of the way theater was at the time. It was very taken over by the church. It was banned by everything but the church in these centuries, but it's so universal. You can put any deity in that place, and death is universal amongst all religions, and every man is called every man for that reason. He represents every person on the planet. The famous and very talented playwright Brandon Jacob Jenkins actually just did his own adaptation, which I have yet to read because I don't want to steal any ideas. But he did his, and it's called Everybody, you know, to take the gender out of it. And I think that's just brilliant because it is such a universal story, and it's absolutely beautiful. It is heartbreaking. I've never sobbed over such a short play. I think it's only 25 pages long because that was also the nature of theatrical literature back then. But I was just a beautiful wreck after I read it. It was just so moving. So that is my current writing. It's very interesting. I have heard Alabama and surrounding states referred to as a theatrical and or artistic desert, which in some respect is true. In Alabama specifically, you only have one professional theater, and it's not even in Mobile. It's in Montgomery. It's the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. So as far as unionized performance and technical work goes, you're really only going to get that there. But Mobile has an abundance of community theater here. And something I have noticed in a place like Mobile, which I have seen in other regions of the country, is the community backup that these theaters have, the amount of love that pours out of all these people. Because in community theater, everything is volunteer based, at least on a performance level. So the actors and dancers and all the crossover in between, everyone is coming out to do it because they love it and they want to tell a story, which is the entire purpose of theater. It's sharing universal human experiences in a fun and flashy way, and sometimes not fun, sometimes heartbreaking way on stage for people who want to come watch it. And I have noticed that no matter what roles I've played, no matter what I do, that just by the sheer fact down here that I want to do it and I want to help make a show happen, the outpouring of support is huge. People just, they love to see it. With the shows that are picked, it's very interesting. I have worked, professionally now at the University of South Alabama with the production we just did. They hired me on as a private contractor. In college shows in areas like Mobile, you can kind of do whatever shows you want because it's for educational purposes, and you get a certain amount of funding from the school so the program can stay afloat. So you're not solely relying on ticket sales. But in community theaters and even other professional regional theaters, they have to make money to stay open. So with this production I just worked on called The Wolves, it's a very new play. It was on the Pulitzer shortlist, so it's not unknown, but it's not well known down here, whereas the community theaters down here are having to do blockbuster musical after blockbuster musical because those are what draws the crowds, which is a very interesting thing to see because you have these professional grade artists who want to do plays like The Wolves, something that's considered niche theater, or, if you're a snob, I guess, real theater where it really gets you acting or really gets you having to tap if you're having to do a musical like that. And we don't get that a lot in community theater down here right now because everyone is having to rebuild from the pandemic. One theater just released their season for next year, and it is truly, even if you don't know theater at all, you know these musicals. They're from very famous playwrights and composers, and they just have to make that money back. Whereas in collegiate level shows, you can kind of do whatever you want, which is very interesting.
What do you think about the struggles of an actress as she ages?
If I were going out for, let's say, a big name Broadway play or musical or even a movie, in order to make myself a little bit more marketable, would put my age range as 16 to 25. And I know I look young, but I do not look 16. I know in my experience, a lot of body dysmorphia problems, Meryl Streep, I believe, is in her 70s now, and everyone always says, wow, she looks so good for her age. And then my grandmother, who is, I think, only 5 or 10 years Meryl Streep senior, really doesn't look that much older than her. we're just fed this narrative of, oh, all these 30-year-olds playing 16-year-olds, that's what a 16-year-old is supposed to look like. And therefore, when you're 30, if you have but one wrinkle, you look really old, which is very interesting. It calls back to that lack of authenticity, which is not a new problem at all. It's been that way for a very long time. And I do believe it's changing. We find issues with it in these huge franchises. To call back to Tom Holland, for instance, when he was cast as Spider-Man, I think he was 18 or 19, and an 18 or 19-year-old playing a 16-year-old, sure, they aren't children. You need to have adults on movie sets because the days are long and there are child labor laws that are very necessary. And so, I get it, casting an 18 or 19-year-old, but, that was 7 years ago. And now they're making another movie that's only a few years in the future. So now you do have a 26-year-old who's still portraying a 19-year-old. And, it gets a little hairy there. But it's never going to be easy. Being a woman, specifically in any industry, is hard. We've got the odds against us. But I have seen a huge movement recently of the idea of graceful aging and reverberation of authenticity in our industry. And I think that is moving in a positive direction. If you're going to be 30, play a 30-year-old. And I also think that is going to bring about a huge movement of, we don't have to see pieces that are only about teenagers, because that you live past your teenage years most of the time. And the movies and the musicals and plays that interested me when I was 16 just don't interest me in the same way anymore, because those are struggles I've lived through and that were explained to me in whatever way they were at the time through that media. But now I'm 23 and I sometimes have no idea what I'm doing and don't always have pieces of art to fall back on. I just have to call my other struggling 21 to 25-year-old friends and say, hey, what do you think about this? And that sparked so many conversations. I have an artistic buddy, I like to call them. Their name is Lily. And we talk a lot about, there isn't this in theater. So what if we started creating it? And I think those conversations are going on everywhere. I hear so many people my age and a little bit older, I'll say between the ages of 22 and 30, we're finally getting into positions of power. We're no longer the students. We are starting to be the directors or the assistants and whatnot. And we finally have a say, and all these different types of stories that can be told from that, I think, will become more evident within the next few years. And I think that's just great. I was kind of pushed into it because I had spent so much time in the scene shop at South, and I loved it. I love painting. It's very cathartic for me. It's very funny because I cannot do it. If you put a canvas in front of me and tell me to paint something, I won't be able to do it. I'm not a visual artist in that capacity. But if you tell me to do it scaled to a stage, I can do that, because it's kind of all just math. You just measure everything out and paint inside the lines. But they said, okay, you've done this for a few years. If you absolutely hate costuming, you can go back to it. You can go back to scene shop. So I went and I did costume shop for one semester, and I kind of never looked back. I was still allowed to paint if I wanted to. But again, back to what I said earlier, building a piece of clothing for someone, seeing their face light up when they see a piece of clothing that was tailored for them, that fits their body, because we took all these intricate measurements and made the piece to fit them, is a really powerful bit of joy. I remember being a freshman and I was in a musical and they made a little gold dress for me. And, we don't really have clothes tailored for us anymore. Everything is such mega shopping. The fashion industry is all about quick output. So we don't have clothes handmade for us anymore. And being able to do that is quite fun. There aren't very many opportunities for that outside of the theater. And I just think it's really cool to be able to do something that is sort of antiquated, but is so relevant to our industry. At South, we have a huge inventory to pull from. In my experience, and from what I've seen in other even area theaters here, like the Mobile Opera, you take old garments and repurpose them. I will say in theater, we use a lot of hardy material because it has to last for multiple performances. Specifically, if you're dancing or in a fight scene where you have to roll around on the ground, you want the material to be as tough as possible because it has to last for multiple performances and it needs to look as if it's never been jostled around before at the beginning of every performance. The general rule is they're made one step down from, boutique level. We make it almost to where you can buy it in a store. But it's just, if you flip it upside down, you could tell it was handmade and you can't quite buy it in a boutique or anything, but it is almost to that level. We had an old costume that was made for a man, actually. There's a role in this play called The Importance of Being Earnest that is played by a man, even though the character is a woman. It's a bit of, antiquated comedy. Ha ha, a man is playing a woman. But we had to alter it to fit my friend Dory, who is very petite, is very tall, but is very, very small in the waist and the shoulders. And this costume was originally made for a very broad man. So we had to essentially take the entire costume apart, cut it down, and resize it to Dory's body, which was very interesting because, as I said, Dory is extremely petite, and this costume would have been huge on me, and I am much wider than Dory is. I would not call myself a costume designer, but the costume designer who I have worked with, who is actually the new professor I mentioned earlier, her name is Christina Johnson. She has a plethora of experience in terms of costume construction and design. She works hand in hand with the director to see what type of story they're trying to say. For instance, Major Barbara was just realism. We wanted it set in the 1800s. The 1840s, I believe, was the decade it took place in. And she did a whole bunch of research on specific costumes because we were, transitioning out of I believe it was the Georgian era into the Victorian era. And there's a whole bunch of, bustles were a thing, but they weren't as huge. And ascots were a thing, but they weren't as huge. And pocket squares were coming into style again, and certain colors that had not been in the Georgian era were now present in the Victorian era. So she did all of that research and then shared it with us, her construction crew. Christina is also very good about asking, what projects we wanted to work on. And in that specific semester, I really wanted to work on alterations, because a good job, if you're just starting out in the costuming industry, is going to just work in a costume shop over the summer, over a season of theater, doing alterations. So she let me hem all the skirts and alter that costume for Dory that I just mentioned. And someone else really wanted to do construction from an original pattern, so they built the vest. And Christina just shared all of her research and the concept that she had worked on with the director, and let us use our own creativity and actual physical abilities with our sewing experience to bring her and the director's idea to life.
Have you done any avant-garde theater?
Not really. Again, collegiately, it's something that we were not really given the opportunity to do. It wasn't the university's fault, but we are a smaller program. We didn't really have the numbers to put on anything super avant-garde. But it is something that I was taught about in my classes, and I have done research on, and it has been explained to me in a lecture style educational level. I do scenic painting. We did a show when I was a freshman at South called She Kills Monsters, which is about a Dungeons and Dragons game. So our scenic design team constructed the stage into different levels that were step up, so it looked like a game board. And then with my scenic painting partner, his name is Zach Gibson. He is also extremely talented at scenic painting. He and I created these different colors that then went on these different levels. So one of the levels was a darker reddish brown. So that was kind of the deserty part of the stage. And then there were blue areas to represent water. It's all very metaphorical and a little bit abstract, but at the end of the day, the stage looked like a 3D human-sized game board. And that's one of my favorite sets I've ever painted. It was honestly very simple to paint because it was just kind of picking random squares and painting them a solid color. And then we drew in some lines to make it look aged, but it was so simple, but so effective. I remember our director came in for that show and pulled Zach and I aside and said when he walked in and saw the stage, he started crying because he didn't expect it to look so good, which was really big for me to hear as a freshman. It was a very big bout of confidence that he instilled in me. And we painted a lot of realistic sets. Again, I call back to Major Barbara. I helped on costumes as well as scenic painting for that show. And we had to paint hundreds, if not thousands of bricks, which there is a method which makes it easier. You don't have to paint each individual brick, but it's still very time consuming. And there is a part that is individual where you have to add a shadow line and then a highlight line. And they both have to be very specific widths, which can be very tedious and was very time consuming. But once it's done, if it's done correctly, it looks so real. And that's so rewarding for me personally, is after you spend these hours on these paint jobs and then it's a job well done, I love that. And it just adds to the element of realism in the shows that we're doing.
It looks to me that you would also be good at choreography.
Oh, thank you. I have dabbled in choreography. My technical dance experience, like I said, happened from the ages of 2 to 10. So I have definitely lost a bit of the memory from that, but I did just choreograph actually back in January. There is a fundraiser held for Prism United, which is Mobile's LGBTQ plus support center. And we do a fundraiser called Bent Broadway, which is just you sing songs and dance, but it's gender bent. So I sang You'll Be Back from Hamilton because that's normally sung by a man. So, just defying the gender norms for this LGBTQIA plus fundraiser. And I did choreograph for that, and it was very fun. I got to choreograph tap for the first time, which was very hard, but very rewarding. My local dance mentor, who I'm actually working on a show with her now, her name's Rebecca Aaron Howard, and she is so talented. She has choreographed almost every show I've been in here. She pointed me out after the show and said she was so proud of me and that the tap was so good. And hearing from her, I had just done Big Fish with her a few months prior, which had a huge tap number in it. And knowing all the intricacies of that number and how I was able to apply what she had taught me there into the tap number that I choreographed was super rewarding and super nice that she told me I had done a good job. It's always nice to hear positive reinforcement from your mentors and the people that you really look up to. They kind of all bleed into each other. I'm currently working on a production of The Wolves at the University of South Alabama. Like I mentioned earlier, I am the assistant director for that production. And then I was actually also last minute cast in it as well. We had some casting issues. So I play a very small role at the very end. So it kind of worked out. I was able to direct for most of the project. And then just last week before we opened, kind of had to give up my director's seat because I had to go perform at the end of it. But it's just a little 3-minute monologue at the end. So nothing too big. And we closed that this week. Our last performances are this Thursday and Friday. And I started rehearsals last night while we have our off days between the 2 show weekends for a production of Man of La Mancha, where I am a principal dancer and I have one song. I'm playing Antonia. So that will bleed into the summer as I have 2 weeks of rehearsal for that. And then we go into tech and opening. It's kind of a whirlwind. I feel like I have whiplash. It'll be the shortest I've ever rehearsed for a show and a full-length musical at that. It's a lot to learn, but Rebecca, like I said, has been awesome. She sent me the choreography videos since I haven't been able to be at rehearsals because of the Wolves. And then I plan on helping out with the next season at another theater, the season I just mentioned that they have blockbuster after blockbuster show. It's going to be a huge season for them because it's an anniversary season. And I plan on joining their board of directors to help them navigate that. My full-time job right now is program coordination here at the Mobile Arts Council, and I adore my job. It's not something I would have ever thought I would get into, but I was supposed to get an internship for my degree, and I was actually set to go up to Maine the summer that COVID hit. I had a costuming internship, which is why I was so interested in doing alterations during Major Barbara, because that would be the type of job I would be doing up at that theater. And I wanted to, be ahead so I could be an asset and not have to learn everything from scratch. But of course, COVID hit and theater just shut down. So I did not get to do that internship because that theater wasn't running. And I found an internship here at the Arts Council, and I wasn't doing the same type of work I currently am as the program coordinator because I was just an intern, but I learned so much. And all the arts advocacy at the Mobile Arts Council does largely work with the visual arts, but they are working to expand, which is a big reason why I got hired here, to things like theater and literature and even the cooking arts and dancing. And I love my job. I realized through my internship and now working here as a full-time staff member, I love talking about the arts and I love spreading awareness on the importance of the arts. And I do that 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then I'd say close to, with rehearsals and extra hours of prep, I'd say 20 hours a week on anything theatrical. I'm not always painting and always doing costumes and always acting. For instance, I'm not helping with painting at all for Man of La Mancha because they had to do that while I was in rehearsals for the Wolves. It was this past Saturday, actually. They all went up there and had a huge paint day, but I had a performance that day, so I couldn't go help. So it's not always everything all at once, but I will be doing a few costume alterations for the show, which will, probably equal about 10 hours of work in total over the course of a week or two. So it's not, too bad. It's not 24/7 work, but I'd say between my full-time job and theater, I work about 14 hours a day.
I was wondering, do you collaborate with schools?
I have in the past. I did a lot of work with our improv troupe while I was in college. We would go to the area high schools and do performances and workshops, which was so fun. I love that. I also do, with my current job, I do 2 different competitions. I do the Visual Arts Achievement Program, which is an area competition that then translates into a state competition at a later step with all of the area high and middle schools. And then I do Poetry Out Loud, which is a national poetry writing and recitation contest. So that's really fun for me because I get to help these kids perform poems, which is, basically just acting. It's just poetry instead of theatrical literature. And I love doing that. And that's a high school competition that I help with. That is the plan. I am currently preparing to apply. All of the applications should start opening in August or September. I would love to go to Sarah Lawrence. It's up in New York State, and they have a wonderful master's program. I want to get my master's in directing because it's just, if you want to be a director, you have to take all the costume and lighting and scenic design classes. You should take an acting class or 2 because, if you don't know how to act, then how are you going to help somebody else act? And it's such an all-encompassing field that can, with a directing degree, I would love to be a director full-time, but if that doesn't happen, I can put it to work in so many other areas. It's a nice open-ended degree to have. And if Sarah Lawrence has a very well-rounded education program, much like South, from what I explained earlier, my degree won't quite look like anybody else's because I'll be designing it as I go. And as far as American graduate school tuition goes, they're actually very affordable and have an awesome program. So the current dream is to go there. I would love to start in the fall of 2023, which is when I'll be applying in the next few months. And I would just, it would just be amazing to be able to go there. But I have a few other schools on my radar. Well, my mentor that I mentioned earlier, John Nara, he has professional directing credits, but just seeing the work he's done on an educational level at South and how he's inspired the next generation of actors and even other theatrical artists, and knowing that there are other people out there like John who are doing that and creating the workforce that I'm going to be working with, I really admire him and people like him. I know we hear this all the time, but it's true. Our educators are the backbone of society. They are what makes all of the workforce that is not in education possible. They are inspiring and creating the artists and the workers of tomorrow, and people like John Nara. And John Nara, of course, I just adore that man and think he's so good at what he does, and he cares so much. And I aspire to have a career similar to his, not on an educational level, but just art for the sake of doing art and art for the sake of making people's lives better.
Where do you see yourself 10 years from now?
That's always such a hard question. I would love to eventually have my own theater or take over a regional theater where I'm, the production head or the artistic director, and increase accessibility to the arts in different areas. In Mobile, for instance, we are currently in the works of getting a professional grade theater built here. It's slow progress, but again, progress is progress. But there actually is currently no handy, capable, accessible theater in Mobile. And that's an issue in a lot of places. And there are people working in the state. There's one individual working up in Huntsville, Alabama, who has done a lot of research and made a lot of progress in sensory sensitivity theater for children and audience members on the spectrum, which I think is so important. There is so much proof to back up the significance of like theatrical therapy in terms of people with sensory deprivation, people on the spectrum, even people with physical disabilities or who have been injured, things like that. And I really would love to ultimately increase accessibility from the arts to individuals like that, because there is currently, in my opinion, not a lot of room for people who are outside of your, stereotypical able-bodied, able-minded group. I actually read a play recently that is huge, in my opinion, for its representation. It's called The Cost of Living, and it's about a man with cerebral palsy, and then an alternate story, a B plot, if you will, a woman who's in a car accident who has become a quadriplegic. And the casting note specifically calls for someone who is actually a quadriplegic and actually someone who has cerebral palsy, which I believe should be the standard. We shouldn't have these able-bodied people acting in these roles when there are people who actually do have these conditions who are just as able to act in these roles. And the representation there is so important. And I would love to be a part of the generation that is already starting to make things like that happen. I'm very lucky. My parents are not artistic people, really, not in the theatrical or dance sense, but they have always been very supportive. They have the mindset of, as long as you're okay, as long as you're happy, we'll support you, even if we don't get it. And they usually don't get what I'm doing. I will say, hey, I'm going to assistant direct a show about soccer and teenage girls. And my dad will just say, well, all right, have fun. But he's always supportive. And my mom she's one of my biggest cheerleaders. I had my first rehearsal for Man of La Mancha last night that I mentioned. We have a bunch of really strong singers in the show. And I have had vocal lessons, but I am not a singer first. And I was extremely nervous to go sing my song in front of these classically trained opera singers. And she just said, Who cares? You got cast just like they did. You just go kill it. And I said, you're right. It's very nice to have that support. And while they have not necessarily been, I guess, a fountain of resources, they have made room for me to be able to find my own resources, which I just think is really cool because their interests and mine definitely do not align, but they did not let that be a factor in their support of me. They just said, okay, you go do you. As long as you're happy and you can sustain your lifestyle, then have at it. And that's always just been awesome. Mobile it's so surprising. It is a slew of artistic culture. We have the Mobile Opera, which is a professional grade opera theater. They do these wonderful productions twice a year in March and October, I believe, if not September. And they're always beautiful and they're always just chock full of, it's very interesting because they have a bunch of local talent made up from local theatrical children and adults, college students, and then they hire in professional grade singers and performers for their lead roles. So it's a great melting pot of getting to see, professional grade performing while seeing your local community also perform at a professional level. So the Mobile Opera is great. We have the Mobile Symphony Orchestra, which performs in our historic Sanger Theater. The Sanger opened in 1927, and it's this beautiful old theater that seats 1,900 people, I think. It seats a lot of people, and they are always great. The symphony has never disappointed me, and I'm not necessarily a classical musical fan, but our symphony is out of this world good. We have 2 adult community theaters, Chickasaw Civic Theater, that's just right outside of downtown in Chickasaw, and then we have Joe Jefferson Playhouse, which is the theater I mentioned earlier, who's about to have their 75th anniversary season. And both of those theaters are just charming and full of great people and great attitudes and stellar performances as always. We have a bunch of children's theater too, that they are always putting on shows. We have the Packed Theater, Bay Area Performing Arts, Sunnyside Theater, Eastern Shore Arts Center. They are always putting on professional grade children's theater, which is so fun, and it offers such an educational opportunity that truly, in my experience, is not offered anywhere else in our area, even up to like Central Alabama. So it is truly a great experience for the southeastern part of Alabama, Mobile and Baldwin counties. We have, like you said, amazing food that always comes with free live musical performances, depending on what restaurants you're at downtown. The downtown scene is always fun. There's always live music. There's usually some form of public art going on. Once a month, we have a huge arts festival that I actually do a lot of work on called Art Walk, which is just a huge celebration of local arts and crafts, vendors, musicians, dancers, performers of any type. It is just an all-around celebration of the arts community in Mobile. It is one of my favorite things. Again, I'm a little biased because I do a lot of work on it, but it happens once a month. So if we can put on a whole arts festival once a month, there's a lot to celebrate. And I just think Mobile is this wonderful bit of artistic potential that is just waiting to be discovered by the rest of the world.